minutes, we will see where I end. Depends on how much I have to say. No, this is a little bit of improvisation. This is my favorite subject. So we will see where it ends. Pre-hospital e-health. Okay, so what is that? Well, maybe this is a hint. This is where it started for me some 30 years ago in 1986. We had an idea. You can say that Televerket at that time, Telia, they had launched something called Mobitex. And we had this was a communication system that should cover the whole of Sweden. It was the world's first packet-switched data network, and it should be used by all the blue light organizations in the country. So we thought that this seems to be a good thing to use for something. What can we use it for? Well, why not try to see if we can send ECGs from ambulances and other information and prepare for their arrival, but also do something in the care that we deliver in the ambulance. And this was something, as I said, we started with in 1986. This idea we had is still valid, although a lot of things have happened. This idea about sharing information and taking the patients to the right place, it's still very valid. So what we did was that we designed a system called MobiMed, which I followed for many, many years, all from the idea in my head until we launched it around the world. And that was really something that started when you got the dispatch information from the dispatch center. You took care of that information in the ambulance. And then when you got the patient, you started to collect information on the patient. You could measure an ECG, transmit the ECG, for instance, to a hospital where they could give you guidance on what to do and where we should bring this patient. You continue this notes and transmission when you were in the transport. And when you arrived at the hospital, you could send the information you had gathered both to the EMS service and also into, for instance, the healthcare record. And this was what it was all about. And we did a lot of things here. We designed the monitoring equipment. We were the first, I think, to bring out PCs in the ambulance sector. And we have used almost any communication system that is available for doing this, including using satellites for this East Indiaman Göteborg, which sailed to China. We had a system on that one as well. And today the system is still around. I have left the company some almost 6 years ago now, but it's still around, looks a bit different. But there are some almost, I think, 2,000 ambulances using it around the world right now. So what is pre-hospital care? Well, what you have seen is one part of it, that's ambulance care. But I usually say that it's something that starts with an incident happening somewhere. Someone called for help. And it's there the care process starts. And it ends when you hand over this patient to the right care level at the right place. It could be a hospital somewhere, but it could also be that you decide to leave the patient at home or book them for an appointment with the primary care. It's mobile, takes place outside hospital environment, and what you usually see there is ambulances, helicopters, airplanes, boats, and whatever, but it's very, very mobile. So mobile communication is essential here. Also in this pre-hospital sector, you should take care of anything from a small incident, which could be if something happens to us, or it could be a large accident. And today, unfortunately, these are of different sources, not only catastrophes or train accident. It could be other things like Drottninggatan in Stockholm. It's the same resources that shall take care of this. So if this shall work, we need to have good cooperation, interaction, and information exchange among all those parties that are involved in such a process in order to make it as good as possible for the patient. If we look at this sector, we have the same challenges as within the whole healthcare sector, as I mentioned before, with all those demographic changes. But there are also other things that happens in this particular sector, and that is that we introduce more and more what is called care processes for different types of diseases, like myocardial infarction, strokes, trauma patients, and other things, geriatric patients. And that means that the people in the ambulance, they need to take very important decisions on the care to be handled with that patient. So where to go, for instance, or which treatment to start. And that's a tough situation because they can see anything. They are not experts in one thing. They should be experts on everything. And that is, of course, very hard to be. So they need different types of clinical decision support. They need to be able to communicate with other stakeholders in this process, have telemedicine solutions, etc. So there is a great challenge for ICT in this sector. And this is just some examples of different types of care processes. But even if we started this some 30 years ago, they are still not using it to the extent that they could do. Very much still handles with telephone and paper. And there is much, much, much more to do in this area. And therefore we have designed this area, which was mentioned in the introduction to me, which we call the pre-hospital ICT arena, where we try to bring together all stakeholders to promote a more effective use of ICT in this pre-hospital sector. I will give you some examples, what benefits we can have for doing this in a good way. You have probably heard about acute myocardial infarction. There's something stopping the blood flow in the coronary vessels of the heart, and that's not a good situation. Typically, you have two ways to handle a myocardial infarction in the acute phase. One thing is to give something called thrombolytic treatment. That is a drug that solves the clot and then opens up the vessel again so that the blood can start flowing again. Another thing is doing what is called a PCI. That is that you bring in a catheter into the arteries and then take away mechanically the clot that sits there. And that is done at the hospital during X-rays and stuff like that. But the important thing already when you meet up with the patient in the ambulance is decide which treatment is the best for this patient and where shall I take the patient and how can I make sure that those at the hospital can prepare for this PCI treatment already when I'm on the way in so that it can go as smooth as possible. Because one of the most important things here is time. It's the same thing with stroke. Time is essential. Every minute means that you lose muscle tissue. So this is just a way to illustrate this. If this is where something happens, you are on a negative slope until you have a chance to stop this process from going on. And there are different types of delays in that process. For instance, you wait to call for the ambulance. The ambulance takes some time, and there could be delays at the hospital. I will not go into these details, but the important thing again is to reduce the delays all the way. And the first thing we could do when we looked at pre-hospital thrombolysis and also PCI is to reduce by moving the diagnosis. If we can make a diagnosis already in the ambulance, then we can prepare for this and make sure that we have a slim transport to the right treatment. We can even move treatment because this thrombolytic treatment, this drug, we can administrate that already in the ambulance if we have a doctor saying that it is okay to start. That means that we can move this very good treatment all the way from the hospital into the ambulance. And sometimes we have ambulance transports over an hour or something like that. So, and you can say that, as I said, every minute is important, and we are talking about, say, 20, 25 minutes sometimes. I will show you an example of this. And in order to do this, you need to transmit the 12-lead ECG. Because by looking at the ECG, for instance, you look at those called ST levels here, you can see whether there is an ischemia, lack of oxygen in the heart muscle or not. That's a strong indication for that you are having a myocardial infarction. So this needs to be transmitted from the ambulance. You need to take it there and transmit it. This is just an old slide, what the system looked 10 years ago, something like that. But here we had several ambulances that's connected to a service station, and they used all possible communication systems. Today they use 4G, and we have used satellites, we have used whatever. So this is the way of sending information, and then there is a complete network behind there. Because you have one server, for instance, serving a whole region, like Västra Götaland, they have one server. And all hospitals in this region and all the treatment units can connect to this server to look at the information. And from the ambulance, you can also send an alert to a specific unit if you want to get in contact with them particularly. So there's a lot of IT in this part. And of course, if we are improving the communication, we can send more information. When we started, we had Mobitex 1200 baud. Then we can send a 12-lead compressed algorithm every 4th minute. But since communications are improving, we can send more and more information and add additional information to make it easier to make a diagnosis on the information. So, have we seen any effects of this? We can say that our system was introduced in the 90s here in Sweden. And just to give you some figures, in Sweden we have around 27,000 cases a year of myocardial infarction. And the mortality that year was 26%. So about every one fourth die of this within 28 days. And of these 27,000 cases, approximately 60% comes in with an ambulance. So whatever we can do there is very important. And this is the figures today. But if we look at what has happened since the 90s, we have still reduced the number of deaths with about 50%. And much of that is caused that we have a more slim transport from when we meet up with a myocardial infarction patient till we have them and give them the right treatment. So that is very much due to having more and better e-health systems. This is a study we did in Germany, where we had one system running our system and one without. There were some 400 patients or something included. And here we can see that the 30-day mortality when they used our systems was almost 5%. The old way of working was almost 15%. And that's a big change, because these were people that died. And if we make a calculation, very simple, and it's not very scientific, but this could mean a difference in this area with 450,000 people, 65 cases a year. That could be saved just by alter the way they are taking care of those patients. So this is what you can do with e-health. Now for something of the projects we are running right now, and I'm of course running out of time. Projects we are running on this pre-hospital ICT arena. If you're interested, you can visit our website. Just click PICTA and you will find what we are doing. One of the first projects we did was a project called Pre-Hospital Stroke. And that ended this summer. And the idea was here to look at the information flow in this whole process and try to see if we could make technical and some semantic interoperability in this care chain. And we defined the project in 3 steps. First, look at what is being doing in the world and give a recommendation on how we should handle this. Then test it technically, and finally do a clinical evaluation. And I usually say that this is what it's all about. Agree on track with wagon coupling, so that could be tough enough in this sector. We had 21 parties involved in this project, all representing all different groups. And why did we choose stroke? Well, 25,000 new cases a year, mortality about 20%, and 30% get so much problems that they cannot cope with their own lives anymore for the rest of their life. The rest 50% have more or less problems afterwards. So this is something that is very important to do something. And it's also the most costly disease in the society. And we have the same problem as with myocardial infarction. Time is essential. For every minute we can save in the giving treatment, that's very important. So we looked at this chain, looked at what information is important in each step. We also looked at bringing in streaming video from the ambulances to make it better to give the right diagnosis. And well, we ended up in some stuff here. And I would just skip those technical tests we did. And this was a very important thing, which I will tell you a little bit about before I end here. What we did at the end to show that this had some effect on the way we treated the patient was that we introduced what we call food scale simulations. That means that we simulated real stroke cases all the way from when the people got a call, where they won a road with a small simulator in front. We had a mannequin, a doll, which showed up the typical diseases. They met them at their home. We brought the patient into the ambulance, transport, and treated the patient, and looked at what they did at the hospital when they left them off. And since we could videotape everything here, we could hear what they were saying, we could really much look into how they were using this IT support in order to take care of patients. And we can also compare what they did with and without the IT support. So this was very, very effective. And the reason it's so important is that we can control them. We can do it in a short time. It's very tricky to do this in real world. And we have no needs for ethical approvals. And we don't need to go into a costly CE process. So we got a lot of information. So what we are doing now is really that we are trying here in this region with different actors, try to set up a complete pre-hospital test bed where we really can run complete care chains to test various stuff, including what we are doing now, and that is looking at video support. Okay, I'll stop there. Time is running fast.
Okay. One fast question if you have.
Or I can wait here and we can take it afterwards.
Okay, that's good. Thank you so much.
It works. I don't have that HDMI. So.
You have to change the source in front.
You mean here?
Yeah.
Okay,
Good. Okay, thanks.
So far we talked about control systems and EHEAD. In this last presentation, it will be in the field of power engineering, and we have with us Göran Eriksson. Göran is the head of research and development at Svenska Kraftnät. This is the company in charge of Swedish National Grid for electricity. He is also an associate professor at the Electric Power and Energy System Department at KTH. So thank you for accepting the invitation, and let's see what he has to tell us about SmartGrids.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me in the back?
Yep.
Good. Then I skip the mic. Okay, yes, my name is Göran Eriksson. I'm with Swedish National Grid. I will talk about communication, but more on a broader scope, and also how we use it. And I will come back to what we refer to as smart grid, which I think has sort of been around as a buzzword for almost 10 years. So, and also, if you're interested, I will also towards the end talk about our trainee program. Anyway, Swedish National Grid was formed when the deregulation of the electricity market took place in the 1990s. So, in 1996, Svenska Kraftnät was divided from the former Vattenfall in order to just run the transmission line. Whereas Vattenfall and Fortum, etc., they run the production of energy. So we just transfer the energy. And our role is to transfer from one place to another. So we operate these number of power lines, substations, and we also have international connections, and with the control center in Sundbyberg outside Stockholm. So our role is to rather be on this level, be on the highest voltage level, in order to transfer energy. That's our business, and we do it all the way from it is being produced. So you hook up sort of a power plant, such as a nuclear power plant, onto our grid, and then you transfer it down even to the regional networks, to the local networks, and here to the 230 volt in, which is in the core here. So we don't have 400 kV here. We have 230, as you know. Anyway, we are also what's called a transmission system operator, which means that we are independent as such, but we operate the system. In our case, we own the system. In other countries, there are other parties that do not own the system. How does it look like? Well, this is our daily business. This is a part of a substation. This is a power line. And you see it, you do not see it right outside, but you typically see outside the big cities and in the landscape, of course. The network, this was mainly being built in 1950s, 1960s in Sweden. So we have networks being like 50 or 60 years of age, meaning that we come to the part that we must renew it. And that's what we're doing. So basically, our investment it's 10 times what it was only 5 years ago. So it's an arena that a lot of things are happening. So it's not a dull, boring arena. I think it's very interesting to work with Svenska Kraftnät. Our role is also to keep the 50 Hertz in the system. That's sort of a quality of how the system is doing. And on one place, you have the consumers, and on the other place, you have the producer of energy, where you have the nuclear, water, wind. Wind is coming, as you may know. But what is tricky with wind, though, is that it blows when it blows. It doesn't blow when I want it to blow. Whereas for nuclear, it is a base power, and the same thing with water. And based on the new environmental requirements, this will become bigger, and that must be dealt with. And what we will see in Sweden is that, well, there is no particular dates on the nuclear, but we will see a sort of a phase out. Typically, you produce energy, you enter it to the national grid and down to the consumers, and then this is an interesting part also. Nord Pool, that's actually a stock exchange, but not for stocks, but for power. So there's an exchange function for dealing with electricity prices. And what I really, this is something that maybe you don't think of, but I mean, electricity is sort of a basis for our society. We've been talking about communication systems, I mean, I don't know how many hours the reserve capacity for a mobile tower is, but I think it's like 3 or 4 hours. So this thing must work. The electricity must really work. If you work in the business, I would say it's very broad. One thing, in order to work in the electricity business, you must be interested in the society, I think. This is sort of an essential part of the society to have this functioning. So it's a critical infrastructure. A lot of people with us have a sort of an environmental mindset. You can work with technology. I mentioned the market issues on the Nord Pool. And also it deals with not only the national issues, but also international. So personally, I'm part of an R&D committee which meets in Brussels 5 times a year regarding research issues that need to be dealt with. Also, if you want to dig down in the really nitty-gritty on equations, you can deal with power flow equations. You can deal with control systems. These are also important stuff in order to have this actually working. And also I mentioned the price settings. Now, I kind of touched on this, but it's sort of a, I don't know the English term for this, but it's sort of a nybyggaranda to work in this business. That has to happen again. Last time it happened was in the 1960s. But what is tricky is the decision process to actually build these power lines. You saw the investment curve, it was not straight up, it was like this. And that is because the decision process takes so much time in some cases. So building a power line could be like 10 years from scratch. So that is also something that we need to deal with. It's big stuff. You typically see what you're working with. This is the dam in China, the Three Gorges Dam, where I think about 300,000 people had to move in order to have this up and running. I'm not saying it's right or not wrong, but that is a decision that China made, and these are big stuff, essential part of a society. This is one of the transformers being used in the project. You see the gentleman below there? I think actually one of them has been associated with Chalmers before. So this is a photo from ABB in Ludvika. Research in Sweden, Chalmers here of course, but also some other universities. If we coming towards the communication, this is an interesting thing. When you want to see how a power network is doing, how do you do that? Well, you can actually go out and visit the power lines and look at them. And we do that sometimes. We also use drones now to do that. But one thing would actually be if we could actually measure some figures and actually collect that and deal with those. And now we're doing that in a better way than we did only 5 or 10 years ago. So that's an interesting research project. I mentioned communication. How does it look like in Sweden? Well, when the power network was being built, you almost see the power network here in blue, but you don't see it, and I explain that in a second. We realized that, well, we need some kind of way to communicate with our substations. And so we ended up building a communication infrastructure. And go back in time, we used the power line to communicate on. So we actually sort of superimposed communication on the power lines. Very slow, but it worked. Well, then someone said, well, why can't we build a radio network? And that we did. So we have also a radio network. But the power line carrier communication channel has been phased out, almost all of them. What we now see is the fiber network. And the first thing with the fiber network was actually the so-called optical triangle that was being built in the 1990s between Stockholm, Göteborg and Malmö. Like this. And it was being built for operation purpose, so we would be able to do operation. But what we also did, we installed so much capacity, so we leased out the overcapacity to Tele2. So out of 24 fibers, 22 of them are leased out to Tele2 on long-term basis. And this was also strategically important for Tele2. They saw very early the rationale of being part of a fiber network. And now what you see is the fiber network which we today have in Sweden, which covers more of the country, where also some of them are actually leased also. So we lease in turn fibers. So that means that we have a sort of combination of power, but also communication. And IT has always been a major part of our system. And the reason is that we have so particular needs for power system operation that we need our own IT system, but also our own communication system. This is basically what I said. Main customers, big telecom operators and energy companies. Yes, what we do is we have what's called OPGW, optical ground wire. The ground wire, which is on the top of the three-phase network, has the fiber optics embedded in the wire. So you have a big wire, and embedded in it, you have a bunch of fibers. And then, of course, you need to do that when you install the ground wire. And in some cases, you can actually wrap the optical fiber around existing wire. But but sort of north of here, I would say, it's not possible to do that due to climate issues. So then you need to have the OPGW. But the wrapping could be used here in some part of Sweden. Yes. I mean, we are constantly improving it and building more and more power lines. And especially if you build other stuff, you typically install the fiber optics at the same time, because the sort of the add-on cost is so low in comparison. And what you typically then do on the power poles, you arrange such that it's getting easy to actually connect to the fiber optic network for also the the telecom operators. Now, smart grids. Everyone has been talking about smart grids for the last 10 years, I would say. It's even written in European Commission papers, but what is it? Well, this is a way of treating it, the application of digital technology to the electric power infrastructure. But you will probably see other definitions. A smart grid. First of all, I said we have IT systems for operating the network. We have the power flow equation and so on. But one thing we would like to do is to actually involve customers more, the end users, you and me, in how to operate the network. Not operate it, but be part of it in order to have it to smoothen out the load in the network. But smart, this is some statements. I mean, the end user always pays. So it's not just a way of saying, well, that introduce a smart network. Well, there's always going to be a price for it. What can be smart?